Welcome back to the second week of the Three-State Beef Conference. And this week we'll be having Kiernan Brandt, who was raised in Wyoming, where he began to develop his own replacement heifers, and he was striving to raise them in a way that they wouldn't only survive the harsh environment and cold winters, but thrive in the production and advance the cow herd simultaneously. From there, he trained as a reproductive physiologist at the University of Tennessee, working to further understand and develop feeding programs and diets for replacement heifers to optimize their development and longevity. He then returned to the Great Plains, spending 3 years on faculty at South Dakota State University, helping producers across the state implement advanced reproductive technologies and meaningful data collection techniques to improve profitability, and also taught several AI schools while he was there at that point in time. He now serves as the professional services technician for Ova Genetics and is based out of Oneida, South Dakota at Yackley Ranches and servicing many of the elite donor females in the beef industry today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Kiernan.
Awesome. Thanks, Connor. I guess just to preface this, for whatever reason, these online seminars always make me feel more clumsy and awkward than talking to you guys live. So please, if there at any point there's questions, feel free to use the little raise your hand emoji or type something in the chat or take yourself off mute. Go ahead and ask them. Really hope this can be more conversational than anything else. You guys will notice here pretty quick, there's a lot of this stuff that you guys will have heard, maybe already using. But from my perspective, as a reproductive physiologist, replacement heifers are one of our surest bets that we can take meaningful measurements. We can deploy meaningful strategies. I think in today's cattle market climate, there's a lot of drive and a lot of reward just for getting a live animal out of a cow. And there's nothing wrong with capitalizing on opportunities, but in terms of progressing the cow herd, replacement heifers have always been near and dear to my heart, just through how I got into this, how I've developed as a cattleman and as a reproductive physiologist. And it seems like that's just your surest bet to employ some meaningful strategies to try and benefit what you're trying to do in the long run. Like Connor said, a little bit about me, born and raised in Wyoming. You guys will hear some of that bias throughout this presentation. In my home county, for example, it takes about 30 acres to put up a cow-calf pair through the summer out on grass for 1 month. That 30 acres will produce about 800 pounds of feed. And so you'll hear some of those biases come throughout this presentation, and especially when we start to talk about some of the strategies that I believe can be really helpful in challenging your heifers to make them work for you, especially as they turn over into mature producing cows. For the last 5-6 months now, I've been with Ova Genetics, taking a little bit different role, working on, feel a little bit hypocritical because, I work on a lot of really ginormous fat donor cows nowadays. And, that's a challenge from a production standpoint. And that's a challenge from a my shoulder standpoint. So don't hold that against me too much. And with that, I think we'll try to get rolling here. We're going to cover some importance of body condition scoring. Again, something that you guys have probably heard a lot about. Just how we can keep a close eye on it, how we can use it to our advantage when we're developing our heifers, how we can potentially shift some of the psychological things that we've been taught over the years, and maybe take a little bit different philosophical view on how we use some of those tools and measurements to progress the operation and what we're trying to do in the long term, how that'll improve fertility and profitability through improved selection. And so to lead off, that some of that bias I was talking about, that's gonna that's going to become apparent right off the bat. What is the average weight of your cows? I'm of the camp that this is a pound-based industry, from pressures through packing plants, through the cash market right now at sale barns across the country. We're getting rewarded for heavier weights, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But is that the appropriate mature weight for your environment? I'm firmly in the camp that a lot of cows, whether that be seed stock, commercial, top to bottom, it's partially marketing, it's partially pressures from segments of the industry that have been put on us in the last several years. I think cows are getting a little bit too big in a lot of places. How can we, as managers, take a little bit harder look to make those cows work for us rather than the inverse of that? Kind of taking away the crutch of those females, and that's something you guys will hear me say throughout this quite a few times. But does that selection criteria and genetic plan match the direction that you want your herd to go? Are we trying to implement strategies to challenge those heifers, where we can expose some of these more lowly heritable traits like reproduction, in a way that'll work for us in the long term? So appropriate expectations for body condition scoring. This chart is derived for cows. It still holds pretty true. Calving to breeding. So, from a cow standpoint, we want a 5 desired at breeding. Feed from calving to move towards a 5 from the replacement heifer standpoint of that. I'm really okay with having them at a 5 as they go into that first breeding season. A lot of data and information out there has historically wanted to push them towards a 6. Producers in the real world don't use half scores very often. That's more of a research thing where we like to complicate everything. But if you had to pick a sweet spot, a magic number, that 5.5 is kind of my magic number for heifers. A rising plan of nutrition is really, really crucial, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. During summer, capitalize on the feed resources that you have. Fall, as they go into that, especially your replacement heifers, this is the time when we talk about some of these paradigm shifts that we want to utilize and potentially get away from historical tendencies. This is the point. Once we've got those heifers preg checked, we understand which ones are sticking around, which ones are potentially open. This is the time when you can turn that feed on to those heifers, have them in a really good condition score going into the winter. And then again, as they turn over, those heifers are still going to be growing themselves as well as raising their first calf and trying to conceive their second one. And so, again, trying to have them in a really adequate condition. So as they roll into calving for the first time, this is one of the instances where we go away from this. And I'd like to see, again, moving towards that 5.5, potentially even a 6 on a wet 2-year-old. And that's something that I think has a high potential to improve rebreeding, and combined with some of the heifer management tactics that we're going to touch on, I think that can be really beneficial. So again, you guys have all probably seen some of this stuff before. Body condition score 1, she's probably about to fall over because she's so thin. We get up to 3, a little too skinny. 5 is kind of in that sweet spot. 7, starting to acclimate a little bit of flesh, and body condition score 9. These are those giant fat pawn cows that I get to work on in my career nowadays, and drive me crazy because you go to put your arm in them and you immediately start to lose circulation because you've got so much compression coming from the outside. So, the University of Nebraska has these images that they've released quite some time ago. These are on 2-year-olds, but serves the point that we're trying to get across here. This is kind of the sweet spot where most, regardless a market segment, this is kind of where everybody likes to live with their cow herd. I think a lot of times that even if producers aren't putting numbers to their cow herd every time they come through the chute, or they're not walking through them and assigning body condition scores, I think these are the 3 that guys do utilize in some form or version in their own mind. And a lot of times, this 4 cow she call her a little thin. 5, you call her moderate or just right. And 6, starting to get a little bit fleshy. So just keep that in mind as we progress through this stuff. Body condition scoring is a great tool. I encourage anyone that doesn't know how to do it with a high degree of success to reach out to someone that does, and just start to put hands on those cattle when they come through the chute, and just to develop your own version of what what these numbers mean in your operation. And maybe even more importantly, understanding when and how to recognize key areas on the cow's body that would signify that she's either on a rising plane of nutrition, maybe accumulating a little bit too much condition, or on the downhill slide and starting to shed some of that condition, let you know that something's going on. More importantly, if that's at a critical time point where that's not something that we want to have going on. Why is body condition scoring so important? Largely because it will either program your animals to become accustomed to that level of body condition. So, for example, a heifer that's been over conditioned from an early age, she's going to be used to that level of grocery intake. She's going to be used to getting high levels of feed. And, from a reproductive standpoint, that becomes a little bit of a two-edged sword, because, granted, they're fleshy and attractive to look at. However, when we start to program those females in that way, and then ask them to go out and be cows and survive on native range, or maybe not quite so free limit feed, they have a tendency to fall apart. In the productive cow side of this, body condition score becomes incredibly important, because it's largely determinant of how quickly those females will come back into estrus. Something that I think, there's some guys out there that are still really, really good about it. Some guys tend to be a little bit more lax with how long they'll let those breeding seasons go, how tight they want that calving interval, things of that nature. Something that's really big for me is that a productive cow should largely have a calf every 365 days. So if she's really thin, she's only a body condition score 3. She's got a 285-day calving interval, gestation period, excuse me. If she's not even cycling for upwards of 90 days, our odds of getting her bred in time to have a calf every 365 days is largely impossible. So, especially when we talk about heifers, I like to challenge them early in life, and we'll get into this a little bit more. Through the post-weaning phase, going into their first breeding cycle, once we have those females settled, preg checked, designated as keepers, this is where I really start to like to push up to this 5.5, 6 interval for body condition score. That's really going to decrease the amount of time that it takes to get those females back cycling, and that's going to do you a lot of good down the road. Give you a lot more opportunities to front end those wet 2-year-olds, and just through a product of time manipulation and management manipulation, hopefully keep those females around for a lot longer, successful reproductive life in the herd. So we look at that from a pregnancy rate standpoint. These girls that were only in a body condition score 3, they didn't cycle for 90 days. Their pregnancy rate was largely negligible, because they didn't cycle in time to make that half of the research project. So you can see, as we increase body condition, not only do we increase or decrease that postpartum interval, but there's kind of a sweet spot here where we start to lock in at the level of reproductive success that we all like to see on break check days. High rates of reproductive success, combined with that low postpartum interval, that's really going to front end your calving season. That's going to tighten up that calving interval. And we can talk about genetics, we can talk about heterosis and crossbreeding systems and all these different management strategies, but at the end of the day, This is one of the, I'm sure you guys have all heard a reproductive physiologist say this at one point or another. That's why we think and why we put so much emphasis on the reproductive success of a cow herd, is because by front end loading that calving season, by really consolidating and maximizing the number of females that are calving in the first 21 days, that first cycle, just through a product of age and normal run-of-the-mill calf growth. Those calves are going to be older and they're going to be bigger, and regardless of where you're selling them, when you're selling them, they're going to make you more money in the long run. So that's really why we put so much emphasis on body condition score. Here again, some older data, but just goes to show if they're struggling, and I would say this is exacerbated even more on the replacement heifer side. If they're skinny, you're going to struggle to get them cycling. You're going to struggle to get them pregnant. And so really, really trying to emphasize what we're doing when we're developing those heifers, and managing it through as they turn over into those young productive cows. I guess before I go any further and talk about some of this data, through some conversations with my banker, through some old colleagues that I met through SDSU, when I was coming up in college, that was kind of the run of the mill statement was, it takes 3.5, 4 years for a productive 3.5, 4 calves before a female has paid for herself. Bankers that I talk to nowadays say that margin is, almost doubled. It's closer to 7. This is the age of inflation. Production costs are through the roof. Granted, we're getting rewarded for it right now at the sale barn and production sales, but emphasizing the reproduction, keeping those cows in the herd for a long time is something I think that we should all be putting high emphasis on. There's nothing I love seeing more, whether that be AIing groups during the summer, or working on cows, working on donor females now, than something that's 12, 13, 14 years old that's still productive, still producing at a high level, still weaning big calves every year and sticking around. I think they're rarer and rarer than they used to be, but that's something that all reproductive physiologists love to see. I remember looking at some large data sets a year or two ago, and the average cow running in South Dakota was only 4.5, 5 years old. So before they were being culled on average, which, if those margins are true, that really is not putting you guys in the black. That's opening yourself up to some top end risk that really I think can be managed pretty well through some of these strategies, through programming your heifers to do more with less, and to work a little bit more for you guys. So we look at this first study. Obviously, if we have our females on a low plane of nutrition before calving, then they're going to be losing body condition. If we keep them there, they're going to continue to lose a little bit more. Then again, not surprisingly, really struggling to see any amount of cyclic activity in any kind of meaningful time period. You can turn it around a little bit. You can, throw the gas to them a little bit. Again, this is fed 150% NRC requirements. You can get them turned around. You can have a pretty decent proportion of females cycling. This is, 150 days. So still too long for what we're looking for. The important part here is that postpartum interval is still a little bit too long. Still too long. We're going to be extending the calving season. We're going to be pushing cows back, which from a weight gain standpoint on the subsequent calves that come out of that breeding season is not going to be great. If we start them on a high plane of nutrition and then cut them off at the knees, that's going to be pretty tough too. We're going to see really poor cyclicity rates. We're going to see, decent postpartum interval just because those females were already in good condition. But a low percentage of them and this becomes really important when we start talking about replacement heifers. If you are over conditioning those heifers after, shortly after they're weaning, getting them pudgy, and then expecting them to go be functional cows as 2-year-olds, that can be really detrimental. If take for example, we have a bunch of females that we have allocated to be, when they're dry lot developed and they're gaining 3.5 pounds a day, which, modern genetics and some of the genetics that we have available to us today, I don't think that's unreasonable. But then you kick them out onto grass, and these are novice females that have never really had to go out and walk through pasture to get their nutrient requirements for the day. That can end up being a mess pretty quick. So again, you look at the high levels, they're going to be gaining condition, but again, we're managing this at an appropriate time. We're going to have an appropriate postpartum interval. We're going to have those females cycling in a time point where it makes sense for us, keep them where we're at calving wise. And the most important part there is 100% of them are going to be cycling. So reproductive parameters, along with some calf weights here, 409 pounds on our low and lows. That's going to be pretty tough, especially when you've only got 33% of them cycling by day 60. Again, you can kind of turn them around. We really start to crack down on that postpartum interval. We got 56% of them cycling by day 60. A little bit of bump there in your calf performance. Maintenance to low, that can be pretty tough. Maintenance to high, we talk about flushing with green grass and really putting those females in a position where they can utilize the most nutrient dense bites of feed throughout the year. That's really what we like to see. We've got an appropriate postpartum interval. We've got a pretty good rate of cyclicity by day 60. And I think, this study here is almost 35 years old. And I think through selection pressures over the past couple of decades, we can really exacerbate those numbers at a high level. It's not hard to set those females up in a position where we can get 100% of them cycling by day 60, especially if you start to introduce some of the technologies we have available, MGA on your heifers, cedars, adequate pasture allocations and some different things like that. We can really get those females turned around to where we have almost all of them cycling without devoting too much extra time for them. Time, management, resources, all of those things. So Trey Patterson manages the Padlock Ranch. He's the CEO. It's a huge operation that spans across northern Wyoming and southern Montana. They run from Sheridan, Wyoming, all the way almost up to Broadus, Montana. He used to be on faculty at South Dakota State University. Had the opportunity to work for Trey, breeding heifers out there for a summer, as a part of a internship that I was doing before grad school, and really got to pick his brain. When I was with South Dakota State, we actually recorded a couple of podcasts with Trey, just because he is such a forward thinker, especially when it comes to how they manage their replacement heifers, how they manage such a giant operation like that, where one hand really washes the other. It's a true systems dynamic that benefits the entire mechanism and keeps the wheels turning in the right direction. And his philosophy, he's published a paper on this. And if anybody is interested in reading that, feel free to reach out to me, or I can get it to Connor and he can get it to you guys. But it's a really good read. Is to generate necessary replacements. First of all, be okay with not getting every single replacement heifer that ends up in the pen pregnant. In my mind, reproduction is lowly heritable. So one of the only ways that we can expose that, and try to increase the heritability of some of those traits, early breeding, uh, is to put selective pressure in ways that make sense. So, for example, Trey's philosophy when it comes to breeding replacement heifers is they don't get any supplemental feed. They're largely, I would say his are probably even body condition score 4.5 to 5. They're not super thin, but he is 100% okay with only getting 70% of his replacement heifers bred, which for a lot of us is a scary thought. They actually will breed those heifers entirely to Wagyu bulls and then direct market those Wagyu cross calves to Snake River feeders in Idaho, where they largely end up going to Kobe beef production. And he likes them because they are 55 to 70 pounds and they come out easy. They're long and slender and skinny and they come right out, and they're that's a very vigorous cross, and they hop right up and take off. He likes those heifers to be bred early in the season, puts a lot of selection pressure on that way, which is another great method for really cracking down and trying to expose some of these higher rates of fertility. They only get about a 45-day crack. Otherwise they're gone. So minimize calving difficulty. We talked a little bit about how he does that. You don't have to be breeding to Wagyus. There's, through modern selection tools, there's a lot of different ways where we can minimize calving difficulty. Using proven high accuracy calving yeast sires is a great strategy. But trying to wean valuable calves from the heifers, this is something that's very near and dear to me. This is one of the reasons that Connor and myself decided to start the Great Plains Heifer Development Center, is really starting to move away from the notion that getting a live calf out of a replacement heifer is good enough. How can we wean a valuable calf from these first calf heifers to where, right now, weaning any calf out of a first calf heifer is great. Weaning any calf off of a cow is great, but how can we start to, do this in a way where we can not necessarily just sacrifice that as either a calf that lacks performance or a terminal cross type animal? How can we wean a valuable calf from heifers that has the potential, if done correctly, to be a replacement heifer herself, or be a herd sire prospect, or a well-performing feeder calf? How can we use these strategies to improve cow longevity? That's a huge point of emphasis from Trey. That's something that I love to see. How can we keep these cows and productive for a long time? And number 6, economic efficiency. How can we do it in a way that makes financial sense? Not allocating feed to those replacement heifers can be challenging. If that's something that you've always done, but it's something that can be done at the right times to, like we said, expose some of these more lowly heritable traits, have a game plan for what we're going to do with those females that don't end up pregnant, and save a little bit of money in the way we develop our heifers. That's going to tie back into that cow longevity aspect and keep them around for a longer amount of time. So reduced size does not necessarily mean reduced breed up. I'm thinking of a quote from one of the larger seed stock producers in my area in north central South Dakota. And the quote directly applies to bull sales, but I think the same could be said about heifers. It's like, we would quit making them so fat if people would quit paying more for the fat ones. And, it's sometimes we have a habit through either marketing or, wanting to program these animals with love and high levels of nutrition that might not necessarily always be in their best interest in the long term. This table here is some data directly out of my thesis. Long story short, we fed these 3 different diets. We were targeting a 1.5 pound per day gain from all of these different heifers. There was 20 heifers in each group. And what we quickly realized, and Mary is going to touch on this next week during her presentation, but what we quickly realized is that those females that were only receiving corn were not necessarily getting a high proportion of all the nutrients that they needed to maintain that standard of growth. So they started to fall behind, even though, we just kept throwing corn at them, They ended up being smaller. They ended up being a significantly different body condition score by the duration of the project. And what happened? They still hit puberty, not statistically different, but on average, they hit puberty 4 days earlier. They weighed less, but at the end of the project, they still, they were 80 pounds lighter than their contemporaries. And what really irked me doing all of the data analysis on these heifers and doing all the breeding on these heifers was that, it wasn't statistically significant, but I think we went 19 for 20 on the corn and distillers and the soybean meal and distillers supplement groups on our first cycle breeding. So that was a fixed time AI and then turned in with bulls. And then the corn supplemented females, they went 20 for 20. So that really, that irked me at the time, but it really got me to thinking as to potentially some of those mechanisms at play. And it forced me to realize that, this was probably one of the first eye-opening experiences to me that made it abundantly clear that, yeah, we can, the rumen is an incredible thing, and we can sometimes put pressure, even though in this particular instance, it was an unintentional pressure, and still get by pretty okay with our reproductive success. And, like I said, we got the high majority of these heifers bred, but they were a little fat. They were pushing up towards that body condition score of 6. And if you were to, keep pushing that needle in a strategic way that made sense, you can see here, our cost per heifer was highest on that corn group just because we kept throwing corn at them, trying to get them to keep up, and they wouldn't do it. But if you can continue to push that needle, be okay with that slight decrease, that slight lack of performance in a way that makes financial sense, through a highly nutrient dense supplement at a decreased rate, take that down to, a point in time where you're not getting 95-99% of your heifers bred, you're getting 80-85, and being okay with that, understanding that that's going to progress your cow herd in the right direction. Those are the cows that are going to stay around, stay in good body rig, hold their condition through hard winters and things like that, and still be able to come back, wean a big calf, breed on time, and stick around until they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. Because that's, at the end of the day, those are the ones that make money. Those are the ones that pay for themselves times over. And those are the ones that I think everybody enjoys seeing. That's the proof in the pudding type of testament that what we're doing is working. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to move my bar out of the way. So, this is a combination of a couple of different studies on a big heifer development review. And what this goes to show is that, the historical observations for developing replacement heifers has been pushing towards that 60 to 65 to 70% of their expected mature weight before their first breeding season. This isn't even in my mind a necessarily low to high gain. These are all pretty low gain heifer development scenarios, and just the associated cost savings that go along with those. So you can save yourself anywhere from $23 to $27 per heifer. And these are, comparisons of, again, pretty low mature weight development scenarios. They were only developed to anywhere from 50 to 57% of their expected mature weights. So, if you extrapolate that to the savings that you would stand to gain from switching to a 55 or 57% development scenario compared to, 70, sometimes 75% I see nowadays, the savings on a per head basis could be pretty significant. And again, we look at the footnotes here on this slide. All of these heifers were exposed to a pretty tight breeding season. Get my cursor to work here. 53 to 57 had a 92 and 88% pregnancy rate in 45 days. And that's a pretty hard ask of those heifers. And they still, with modern genetics, and this is not even that modern of genetics, this was 20 years ago, still able to perform in a way that tells me that, Rick Funston has been doing this research for a long time, and the cattle that he does these projects on are very well adapted to this type of a system, and they perform very well in a low input system. Which tells me that, if you were really wanting to ramp up and push the needle even harder to expose some higher levels of fertility, you could push those heifers even harder. Second study, 261 heifer calves across 3 years. Still 87% a 60-day breeding season, gave that extra cycle. High gains up to 55% of their mature weight, almost 90% pregnancy rate in a 45-day breeding season. And so again, that's not only going to set those heifers up and set you up as a manager of these heifers for short-term savings. It's going to set those cows up for a longer reproductive lifestyle where they're programmed to do more with less. They're really going to be able to go out and work more for you guys rather than you having to baby them up through supplemental feed and some different things like that. That's just gonna cost you money in the long run. So I stole this data was directly off of the one that I mentioned that Trey Patterson had developed. What age group of cows does everybody have the most trouble getting rebred? We went through a pretty rough, pretty wonky breeding season last year. It seemed like May and August decided to switch on us. It was 100 degrees at my house in late May. I think the cool season grasses got burnt up and were really struggling when everybody was kicking bulls out and expecting cows to get pregnant. And a lot of them said no. Preg checks this fall were pretty rough. And I think that was a fairly universal theme throughout a lot of the region. And the 2-year-olds, the wet 2-year-olds that were, like we mentioned earlier, still growing themselves, raising their first calf, allocating a lot of nutrients to milk production, and then trying to conceive with another calf. So essentially eating for 3, they struggled the worst. And so this data that Trey has published, so like we mentioned, he's totally okay with only 70% of those replacement heifers getting bred. What that does, programs those females to be better equipped to hit hard times, to have rough forage years, and still be able to reproductively produce at a high level. And so what he has found through his observations over the past decade and a half is that by challenging those heifers early on in life, exposing the ones that can't, through a carefully managed, low risk, because we've thought out ways to market the open replacement heifers. What he's noticed is that the heifers that stick around, that do get bred in a very tight window, that are okay being a little on the skinny side and still can prove that they can get pregnant early, as wet 2-year-olds, they breed back at a really, really exponentially higher level compared to a lot of operations. What does that mean for downhill success? They're going to stick around. 2-year-olds breeding back at 91, 3-year-olds breeding back at 93, 4-year-olds breeding back at 96%. That's top notch. And this isn't an artificial data set where, they get kicked out. And then when they measure them again at 2 years old, it's an artificial scenario where they get 60 or 75 days. He keeps a pretty standard 45-day breeding window. And still is able to see those high levels of success, which I think is really, really impressive. And, there's a lot of lessons there. Considerations that we do have to make. We have to make the decision to allocate the forage for those heifers. This is one of the reasons that Connor and I see so much value in a custom heifer development scenario. Is that it affords producers the opportunity to not have to do that. Granted, those females are in dry lots, but they're getting a high level of forage. We're not pushing them very hard. We're trying to make this as realistic as possible so that those cattle are equipped to go home and understand how to graze and forage and produce on a low input system. That can be tough when you're trying to figure out pasture management systems and where everything is going to go throughout the year. But I think there is a lot of benefit in training those heifers to know how to eat and how to do more with a highly forage based, primarily grazing system development. Rising plane of nutrition is always emphasized. Compensatory gain has risks and rewards. Are we programming those cattle to be potentially too big and too propped up through supplemental feed, that it's going to inhibit their ability to reproduce when we hit hard years, or when we ask them to go be stock cows in a low input grazing system? But as I mentioned, there's nothing wrong with capitalizing on highly nutrient dense green grass going into a breeding season. And again, if we're putting some weight on those heifers after they've already been pressured a little bit after the breeding season, or ideally right smack in the middle leading up to a breeding season, that has the potential to yield some significant benefits as well. Those heifers, it's kind of similar to flushing a sheep or a goat or anything like that. Hopefully we don't end up with too many sets of twins out of heifers, but we can really capitalize on that rising plane of nutrition, try to get a really good breed up. And, this goes into young cow management as well, which I know Tiago talked a lot about. Compensatory gain, especially on a heifer that was challenged early in her life, kicking her out with her first calf on her side and providing her a high plane of nutrition during those more stressful times of the year, like when she's in peak milk production, when she's going into that breeding season. Just understanding what we're doing with our pasture management, with our cow herd management. How often are we moving those cattle? How much pressure are we putting on them, and is it an appropriate time for us to be doing that? When are you calving your heifers? Could you calve them with the rest of your herd? I go back and forth on this. I see merits to both. If you calve them right alongside the cows, you're really cracking down from a reproductive pressure standpoint on how much time you're allocating them to heal up, rebreed and stick around. But there are benefits to doing it. But it's all, does it make sense for your operation where you're at right now? Is this something that I would recommend trying year one of saying, yep, we've babied heifers for the last 50 years and we're going to start challenging them? Maybe not, but it's something you could ease into, and with proper management and proper forethought to what you're going to do with the open ones, it's something that can be used pretty beneficially from a labor management standpoint on a lot of different things. Early preg checks, that's me getting on my soapbox a little bit as a reproductive physiologist, but I think there is a lot of benefit to preg checking heifers early, even if you're going to extend that breeding season to 60, 75 days. Doing a preg check early so that the veterinarian can tell you, whoever's doing your preg checks can tell you which ones are bred early, understanding the benefits of identifying those ones for yourself to keep back, have those ones go into your production system. If you do have later bred heifers, being able to identify those first of all, and ideally in a perfect world, having a well thought out plan of how, when, and where to market those females, where they might match up really well with somebody else's calving season, management system, some different things like that. But being able to put some of these implements in place capitalize on the information that you're gathering from them. So, this is some older data that former colleague of mine, Robin Salverson, did in conjunction with Trey Patterson when he was still with us at South Dakota State. Putting a little bit of forethought into how the diet type that these heifers are being asked to perform under. You take a look here at the weights of these range developed and dry lot developed heifers. These range, this is again one of the benefits of compensatory gains. These range developed heifers, once they get kicked out, they have a habit of blooming in a hurry. They outperform their dry lot developed contemporaries. Still a perfectly adequate percentage we're cycling there at breeding. Synchronized conception rate, get a little bit of a kick from the heifers that were roughed through the winter, developed in a way where they were totally comfortable going back out and grazing. There was no relearning behavior, which is something we didn't spend a ton of time talking on, but is important to acknowledge and realize just from a cattle management standpoint that, if you're going to develop dry lot heifers and then kick them back out onto green grass, you need to do that well in advance of when you're trying to breed those females, because there is going to be a significant amount of relearning that has to be done. Final pregnancy rates were not that different in 34 days, about 2 cycles, just short of 2 cycles. But I know there is some other data alongside this study. I don't have it for you guys. You'll just have to take my word for it. But these dry lot heifers, when they first went back out onto grass, they were losing almost 3.5 pounds a day, just because what do heifers do when you kick them out into a new pasture? They put their heads down and they walked around and they didn't eat. They went and checked out every single corner of the fence, where the range developed heifers that had been playing that game since they were weaned off their moms. It was business as usual. They were taking full advantage. They were finding feed and they were taking care of themselves. Which is, again, just serves to reinforce a lot of the things that we've talked about. Setting those heifers up in a scenario where they can go out and thrive, where they can do more with less. They might have been a little bit lighter, but they are totally capable of popping when you need them to, conceiving early and on time. And, if I was a betting man, I would probably say that a lot of the cattle that SDSU is still running are progeny and descendants of these range developed females, and less so the dry lot developed ones. Case study, this was put together for another program that I had the privilege to be a part of when I was at SDSU, but the points are still valid, and I think there's a lot to be learned from, just thinking outside of the box and maybe taking some time to think about how we can maybe get away from some of the stuff that we've historically done, to put a little bit more emphasis on trying to program these females to what we want them to do in the long term. Convert heifer development program to roughen it a little bit in an appropriate, I'll say this in preface of Mary's talk next week, but an appropriate time point of grazing crop residue, so that we're not overdoing it, but we're still maximizing on the feed that's out there, capitalizing on that, with limited, highly nutrient dense supplementation based on some of the studies that I showed you earlier. Low side, very low side, this is going to save us $25 a head. High side, 50, maybe even 75. Challenge those heifers to enter breeding at 60% of mature body weight, body condition score 5.5. Again, if you're already challenging your heifers and they're starting to creep back up on you, 90, 95, 100% breed up every year, we can tweak that. We can make that 55% of their mature body weight. We can push that needle a little bit harder. Body condition score 5, maybe. Preg checks 45 day after AI. Coley opens. This program was designed for smaller beginning producers, so put it in there to market as freezer beef. But again, just having some forethought as to what we're going to do with those females. where it's not a surprise that we end up with opens. Having a plan for where they're going to go, if we're going to sell them, if we're going to develop them as some long yearling grass cattle, some really green feeder cattle that are bringing just an absolute boatload right now. By challenging heifers, our average cow size is going to stop increasing. We're going to reduce the maintenance costs across the herd, and we're going to get back to, the old school measurements of what percentage of her body weight did she wean last year. Because I don't think there's anything cooler than a cow that can, wean 55-60% of her body weight at a 205-day weaning weight. That's what really keeps me going. That's why I love to play this game, and I do believe that it's 100% totally doable with modern genetics. Through a lot of these management techniques, we can really stop the terminal style of production selection criteria. We can put the brakes on developing these whopping 15, 16, 1700 pound mama cows and start to identify some more functional females that are truly adapted to their environment, that go out and work for the people that own them, you guys, rather than vice versa. Really emphasizing the fertility in our young cows, because again, that's just going to pay dividends down the road. So these changes don't have to be made overnight. Start somewhere, set a yearly goal, try to improve. That can look a lot different depending on the place that you're at. So set a yearly goal and stick to it. Don't have to sell out to try and put too much pressure in the wrong spot, but it's good to have goals, and it's good to try to get better year after year. Try to keep cows in the cow herd longer. By challenging these replacement heifers to fit your environment, it's gonna improve your cow herd in the long run. Reducing the input costs and replacement heifers, it offers direct cost savings and indirect benefits both immediately and over time. And I don't want to beat a broken horse, but from my perspective, it's a balancing act. It's a teeter-totter, and there's a lot of things we can do as cattle managers to push back on what Mother Nature is telling us to do. But that is going to come with an associated cost. So, for example, I don't know for what reason, but we have gotten busier than all get out, earlier than what historically has been the case, setting up cows and putting embryos in for late December, early January calving. And if we luck out and we get a winter like this one, that might be okay. But I have lived in the Northern Plains long enough throughout my life that I know that is something you probably don't ever count on. So that comes with facility costs and all these different things to make sure that decision goes well. That's pushing back on Mother Nature, and just understanding that, through the technologies that we have in place nowadays, there's a lot of that you can do with a good banker or a really deep bank account, but understanding that there are associated costs with it. And from my perspective, someone that was not born into this industry, does not have a family place to go back to at any point or anything like that. I've always just kind of had to kick and scratch just to play this game. And I'm humble enough to really try to pay attention to what Mother Nature is telling me from a when I should calve standpoint to the size of cow that I should try to be running, to really try to emphasize what those animals can do for me in the way that God intended them to do it, without having to push too much back, without having to build any kind of a calving calving barns and things like that that I just are not necessarily in my wheelhouse for right now. And so with that, I'll leave you guys with this image. I don't think it was on the original set of slides that were distributed, so take a picture of it. If anybody wants more information on this particular thing. This comes from Jan Bonsma, who was a South African scientist in the 70s, late 60s, all the way through the mid 80s, and he's written a couple really good books about this type of stuff, and how all of these factors are intertwined and how there's only so much that we can do. You look at the variables that are intertwined on this wheel. There's only a handful that we have the capability to alter. So really just being well adapted, listening to our environment, listening to our production system and what it's telling us to do. Because if we put too much emphasis on any one of the spokes of these wheels, the wheel doesn't turn. And just trying to create a well-balanced system that we turn the wheel from the center, but paying equal amounts of attention to all of the different variables that are acting upon our animals will keep us around, keep us profitable, and keep us in business raising cattle, doing what we love for a long time. So with that, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.